Physics teaches you something most people never accept. Complexity breaks down, systems fail, entropy wins, but there's one system in your body that has figured out how to resist that. It's not the one you're training. And if you understand how it works, you understand something about survival itself. I'm going to tell you what I've learned by spending 50 years studying systems at the edge of chaos, and then I'm going to show you exactly why that matters to you if you're standing on either side of 40. But first, I need to strip away something you think you know. Everyone over 40 has been sold a story about muscle. Build lean mass, preserve your gains, maintain your nitrogen balance, lift heavy things 3 times a week. The narrative is ironclad. Muscle is life. Without it, you wither. You become frail. You fall and break a hip, and that's the beginning of the end. So the gym industry, the supplement industry, the fitness influencer machine, they've all organized around this one idea: hold on to your muscle and you'll hold on to your life. It's not wrong, but it's incomplete in a way that matters. And the incompleteness comes from not thinking like a physicist about what a system actually is and what it actually costs to keep it running. When I was in my 30s, I was working on black holes. We knew they had horizons. We knew that once something passed through, it was gone, at least according to general relativity. Information vanished. The universe was losing data, and that bothered us. It bothered me more than it bothered most people because I'd been trained to think about information as something physical, something that cannot simply evaporate. So I spent years, literally years, in arguments with Stephen Hawking about whether information was truly lost inside a black hole or whether quantum mechanics had to protect it somehow. Here's the strange part. I was right that information is protected, but the path to figuring that out required understanding something that sounds completely abstract, something about the mathematical structure of space-time and how information can be encoded on a surface rather than in a volume. It took decades. And the reason I'm telling you this is that it taught me something crucial about how to think about any system under stress. When a system gets pushed to the edge, to the point where it's about to break or transform into something else entirely, the rules change. The surface becomes more important than the interior. The information about the whole system gets encoded on its boundary. This is not poetry. This is mathematics. And it applies to black holes, and it applies to quantum mechanics, and if you think about it properly, it applies to your body aging past 40. Here's what I mean. Your muscle is the interior. Your cardiovascular system, your heart, and the intricate network of blood vessels that reach into every cell. That's the boundary. And at 40, the boundary is what determines whether the whole system survives what comes next. I know this isn't what you want to hear. You go to the gym, you see yourself getting stronger, you see the mirror changing, you get feedback. The system is tangible. Your cardiovascular system doesn't give you that feedback. Your heart doesn't send you a text message when it's working efficiently. Your endothelial cells, the delicate lining of your blood vessels, they don't show up on Instagram, so we ignore them. And that's precisely where we make our mistake. Let me build this from first principles the way I'd approach any problem in physics. First principle, what is a muscle? It's an engine. It takes chemical energy, glucose, fatty acids, and converts it into mechanical work. Efficient, elegant, and bounded. A muscle cell can only do so much work before it needs to be resupplied with fuel and oxygen. The harder you demand from it, the more fuel and oxygen it needs. That's the constraint. That's what limits every physical system that exists. So where does that fuel and oxygen come from? It comes from your blood. It comes from a delivery system, and that delivery system has to reach every cell. Not just your muscles, your brain, your organs, your skin. Every single cell in your body depends on blood reaching it with oxygen and fuel and then carrying away the waste products. That system is called the cardiovascular system, and it is not a luxury feature. It is the absolute requirement for anything else to work at all. Now, here's where it gets strange. When you're 25, your cardiovascular system is overbuilt. You could run a marathon. You could sprint. You could do all kinds of physical work, and your heart would handle it with almost no strain. There's slack in the system, there's redundancy, there's what engineers call a safety margin. It's huge. So you can ignore your cardiovascular system and nothing seems to happen. You feel fine. You can still outrun your friends. You can still recover quickly. The safety margin is swallowing up the damage you might be doing. At 40, that margin shrinks. This is not opinion. This is observable fact. The maximum heart rate decreases. The efficiency of the heart at pumping decreases, not dramatically, but measurably. The flexibility of the arteries decreases. The function of the endothelial cells that line your blood vessels starts to deteriorate. These are not separate aging processes. They're all part of the same system degradation, and they all stem from the same underlying physics. Here's the critical insight. Your body is not one system. It's a system of systems. Your muscles are a system. Your bones are a system. Your nervous system is a system. Your endocrine system is a system. And every single one of them depends entirely on the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is not one system among equals. It's foundational. It's the substrate on which all the others run. And when you're 25, because the substrate is so over-engineered, you can abuse it and nothing seems to happen. You can eat garbage, you can not exercise, you can stay up all night, and your body still functions because that safety margin is absorbing the damage. At 40, you run out of margin. This is when the game changes. And most people don't understand the change because we've been taught to think about aging as a smooth, linear process. You get older, things gradually get worse. That's how we talk about it. But that's not how complex systems actually work. Complex systems often have what we call phase transitions. They run fine under certain conditions, and then something shifts, a threshold gets crossed, and suddenly the system behaves completely differently. I watched this happen in physics when I was studying information loss in black holes. For a long time, we thought that information was truly lost. That was the consensus. But as the quantum mechanical analysis got more sophisticated, we realized that the information wasn't lost, it was scrambled. The boundary conditions mattered in ways we hadn't appreciated. We'd been looking at the interior, and the interior seemed simple and clean, information in, then nothing. But the mathematics insisted there had to be a way for that information to escape, and eventually we understood it. The boundary was encoding the information. The surface carried the memory of everything that had fallen through. Your body works the same way, and aging past 40 is when the analogy becomes concrete instead of metaphorical. Your cardiovascular system is the boundary. It's the interface between you and the fuel that keeps you alive. And once you cross 40, if that boundary hasn't been maintained, if it's been allowed to degrade, then the entire system starts failing in ways that seem disconnected until you understand the physics underneath. Think about it this way. You want to maintain muscle mass past 40? Good, smart. But muscle requires fuel. It requires oxygen. To deliver that fuel and oxygen, your cardiovascular system has to deliver blood to the muscle with sufficient pressure and sufficient flow. The heart has to beat, the arteries have to be flexible enough to expand and contract, the capillaries have to be clean enough and functional enough that oxygen can actually diffuse into the cells. If any part of that chain fails, the muscle can't function. You can't generate force. You can't recover from work. You can't do the thing you went to the gym to do. And here's the part that matters. Once you're 40, once that safety margin has compressed, the cardiovascular system is no longer a background system you can take for granted. It becomes the constraining factor. It becomes the thing that limits everything else you're trying to do. You can't build muscle without it. You can't recover from work without it. You can't even think clearly without it. Your brain consumes an insane amount of oxygen relative to its mass, about 20% of your body's total oxygen consumption. If your cardiovascular system is degraded, your brain suffers first. I had this conversation with a colleague at Stanford, and I'm going to name him because he changed how I think about this. It was Rainer Weiss. the physicist who won the Nobel Prize for detecting gravitational waves. We were having lunch, and I was complaining about how tired I was, how I couldn't seem to recover from even moderate exercise, how my brain felt sluggish by afternoon. Rayner looked at me and said something that seemed obvious once he said it, but had never occurred to me. You're not recovering because your cardiovascular system can't deliver what your body is asking for. You've been ignoring it for 40 years. Now it's limiting you. At first, I thought he was wrong. I was doing strength training. I was flexible. I could walk long distances. But he was right. And here's why. I was confusing having some cardiovascular capacity with having a well-maintained cardiovascular system. They're not the same thing. You can have cardiovascular capacity, your heart can beat, oxygen can get to your cells, and still have a cardiovascular system that's degraded, inflamed, stiffened. You can be a prisoner in your own substrate. Once I understood that, everything changed. Because the minute you understand that the cardiovascular system is the constraining factor after 40, you understand something else. It is the one muscle that actually matters. And I'm being specific about the word muscle. The heart is a muscle. It's the most important muscle in your body. And unlike your biceps or your quadriceps, you can't will your heart to get stronger. You can't fake it. You can't push through it one time to get to the next level. The heart gets stronger or stays strong or gets weaker entirely based on what you demand from it consistently over time. This is where the physics becomes crucial because it explains why this is true in a way that goes deeper than just exercise is healthy. It's not just healthy, it's how complexity survives under pressure. A complex system that's pushed, that's demanded of, consistently, in the right way, has to adapt. It has to build redundancy. It has to develop new capacity. A heart that's never pushed stiffens. The muscles of the left ventricle become less elastic. The endothelial cells lining the arteries atrophy. The system loses options. It becomes fragile. But a heart that's pushed consistently in a controlled way, that heart adapts. It develops more capillaries. The heart muscle becomes more efficient at extracting oxygen from blood. The arterial walls maintain their flexibility. The endothelial cells stay active and produce nitric oxide, which keeps vessels dilated and functional. The whole system remains plastic, capable of responding to demands. That's not mystical, that's physics. That's how adaptive systems work. And here's the crucial part. You can't cheat on this. You can't supplement your way out of it. You can't take a pill that makes your heart stronger without putting demands on the system. The adaptation requires the stimulus. The stimulus is work, aerobic work, specifically work that demands your cardiovascular system deliver oxygen at a high rate consistently for a sustained period, not to exhaustion, not to failure, but to a demand that the system has to meet by adapting. I'm 60-something now. A few years ago, I would have told you I was fit, I could lift, I could walk long distances, I felt fine. But I was operating in that margin again, that dangerous margin that makes you think you're okay when the substrate beneath everything is degrading. Then I got a cardiac stress test. My cardiologist, a woman named Dr. Chen, who doesn't accept excuses, looked at the results and said, your heart is operating at a lower capacity than it should be for someone your age. You're getting away with it because you're not demanding much from it, but that also means you're not giving it the stimulus to adapt. You're slowly losing function. That was hard to hear because it meant that all the time I spent in the gym, all the strength training, had been partly missing the point. I wasn't maintaining the substrate. I was just building on top of a slowly degrading foundation, so I changed what I did. Not entirely. I still do strength work because there are reasons for that, but I prioritized something I'd been treating as background noise, making my heart work hard, regularly, sustainably. And this is where I want to be very careful with my language because this is where people get hurt. I'm not telling you to go out and run a marathon tomorrow if you haven't run in 20 years. I'm not telling you to do high-intensity interval training. If you're deconditioned, that's how you have a heart attack. That's how you hurt yourself. The stimulus has to be gradual. It has to be consistent. It has to be controlled, but it has to exist. The physics here is the same as in thermodynamics. A system at equilibrium, a system that's not being pushed, not being demanded of, it tends toward entropy, it degrades. The second law is not optional, but a system that's being maintained at a point far from equilibrium, that's dissipating energy in a controlled way, in response to external demand, that system can maintain its structure, its function, its complexity. It can stay organized. It can stay alive. Your heart at 40 is at exactly that critical point. It can go either way. It can maintain complexity, or it can start degrading toward simplicity. And which way it goes depends almost entirely on one thing: whether you demand something of it, whether you put it in a state where it has to adapt or die. Not metaphorically, physiologically, the system either builds new capacity or it loses capacity. There's no standing still. I spent decades understanding how information can be preserved at the edge of destruction, at the boundary of a black hole, at the quantum mechanical limit, where systems that look classical suddenly reveal their quantum nature. And I realized that the same principle applies to your body. The boundary, the interface between you and the external world, between your cells and the fuel and oxygen they need to function, that boundary is not a passive thing. It's not just there. It's active. It's responding. It's either getting more sophisticated or it's degrading. And after 40, maintaining that boundary becomes the central task of staying alive. Here's a thought experiment that might help make this concrete. Imagine two runners. They're both 45 years old. They both run the same distance, say 5. Runner A has been running regularly for the past 10 years. Runner B hasn't exercised in 15 years, but decides today is the day. Both complete the run. But the physiological cost is completely different. Runner A's heart adapted years ago. The stroke volume, the amount of blood the heart pumps with each beat, is high. The heart doesn't have to beat as fast to deliver the same amount of blood. The arterial walls are flexible. The capillaries feeding the muscles are numerous and efficient. The endothelial function is excellent, so oxygen is flowing exactly where it needs to go. Runner A's heart rate during the run might be 140 beats per minute. The cost of the system is high but manageable. Runner B's heart has lost adaptation. The stroke volume is low. To deliver the same amount of blood, the heart has to beat faster. The arterial walls are stiff. There are fewer capillaries because the system has lost the stimulus to build new ones. The endothelial function is poor. During the run, Runner B's heart rate might be 160 or 170 beats per minute. But here's the hidden part. Runner B's heart doesn't recover as quickly. The stress remains elevated longer. The blood pressure doesn't come down as fast. The parasympathetic nervous system, the system that's supposed to calm you down after stress, takes longer to kick in. Runner B feels terrible. Their body aches. They're exhausted. Now, multiply that. Every day, Runner B's body is running in a less efficient state. Every demand requires more effort. Every recovery takes longer. The system is gradually losing the ability to respond to stress. And that's the problem. It's not that suddenly at 60 you have a heart attack. It's that you gradually lose your capacity to respond. You lose your resilience. You become fragile. This is the phase transition I was talking about. At some point, and it's different for everyone, but it tends to happen somewhere in the 50s or 60s, the system can't compensate anymore. The safety margin is gone. The demands of living push the cardiovascular system beyond what it can deliver. And that's when the cascade starts. You can't exercise like you used to because exercise exhausts you. You lose muscle because you can't stimulate it anymore. You get weaker. The weakness makes you less likely to move. Less movement means less cardiovascular stimulus. The system degrades faster. That's the trap. And the only way out is to maintain the stimulus before you hit that wall, to demand something of your cardiovascular system consistently in the right way so that it never loses its capacity to respond. Now, I want to acknowledge something that I've been circling around, but need to say directly. We don't actually understand all of the mechanisms here. We know the endpoint, we can measure the degradation, we can see what happens when people maintain cardiovascular fitness versus when they don't. But the detailed molecular and cellular mechanisms, exactly how the stimulus translates into adaptation, exactly which signaling pathways are involved, exactly which interventions are most effective, there's still enormous uncertainty. And I find that unsettling. I've spent my career on problems where the edge of understanding is sharp and real. In black hole physics and quantum mechanics, we know the limits of what we understand. We can point to them. We argue about them. We try to figure them out, but we know exactly how ignorant we are. The same should be true here. And the honest answer is we still don't know exactly what optimal cardiovascular maintenance looks like in detail. We know the general principles. We know that regular, sustained aerobic work is necessary. We know that it should be demanding but not dangerous. We know that consistency matters more than intensity, but the exact dosage, the exact type of work, the exact way to modulate it as you get older, there's still real uncertainty. This bothers me because it means that everyone over 40 is, in some sense, doing an experiment on themselves. You're trying to maintain a system that you don't fully understand with incomplete knowledge about what maintenance actually requires. And that should make you humble about your choices. It should make you willing to get measured, to get tested, to understand your actual cardiovascular state rather than just assuming you're fine because you feel okay. I got a VO2 max test recently. It's a simple thing. You run on a treadmill while your oxygen consumption is measured, and it tells you your aerobic capacity. My number was fine. Not spectacular, but fine. But the interesting part was that it was lower than I expected based on how much I was exercising, which meant that I was working hard but not working smart. I was doing the right kind of activity, aerobic work, but I wasn't pushing hard enough to actually maintain my capacity. I was just treading water, maintaining the decay, not reversing it. So I adjusted. I got more specific about intensity. I increased the demands on the system deliberately with some monitoring. And within a few months, the number went up. The system responded, the substrate got stronger, everything else got easier. This is what I'm trying to tell you. The cardiovascular system is not a static thing that you either have or don't have. It's a dynamic system. It's constantly responding to what you demand of it. After 40, most people stop demanding anything of it. They stop pushing. And the system, responding to that lack of demand, gradually loses capacity. They interpret this as aging. They say, I'm just getting old. And they're not wrong that aging is happening, but they're wrong about whether the loss of capacity is inevitable. It's not inevitable. It's a choice made not consciously, but by default, by doing nothing. Here's what I want to leave you with. I've spent my entire career thinking about systems at critical points where small changes lead to large effects, points where the future branches into multiple possibilities depending on what you do now. Your cardiovascular system at 40 is exactly at such a point. You're at a threshold. You can go one direction and the system adapts, strengthens, and you maintain capacity and resilience for decades. Or you can go the other direction and the system gradually loses function, becomes fragile, and eventually the degradation overwhelms you. That's not poetic. That's physics. That's how complex systems actually work. And the only thing separating the two paths is a choice. A choice to demand something of your body consistently in the right way so that it has to adapt or fail. You can't take the adaptation for granted after 40. You have to earn it every single day. Your muscles, the ones everyone tells you to train, they matter. Of course they do. But they matter because they're attached to the system that really matters. The heart, the pump, the substrate that makes everything else possible. Train that muscle, demand something of it, make it respond. Because once you understand what actually determines whether you live well or barely survive past 60, you understand that your cardiovascular system is not something you can take for granted and fix later. It's the only muscle that actually matters. And the clock is running right now